Hello, my name's Andrew, and today we're doing a first impression review of the Vivo Barefoot GOBI HIBER. Let's check it out. Up front, you've got Vivo's typical wide toe box. It's a little more squared off on the side, which is nice for toe display. And then on the top, you've got the HIBER upper, which is kind of like a puffer jacket for your foot. It's very soft and flexible. And when you bend, there's no crimping. They've cut the line in the perfect place with the little sections of insulation here. And then they also have a notch on both sides, which prevents any kind of like weird crimping. And then even though the toe guard is kind of substantial, it's flexible, so it doesn't press anywhere as well. And this area here helps waterproof them a little bit more. They're not completely waterproof, but they had some decent resistance when I took them out on a walk. And you've also got 2 layers here, which helps if you're going through like wet grass, you know, because this is the area right around here where the boot's gonna get the most wet. So you've got the front rubber, and then you've got this layer, and then you've got the top layer, and then you've got the puffer jacket on top. And when I got some water on it, it kind of beat it up on the top, which was nice. So it's got a little resistance. It did soak through eventually. So I would say compared to the GOBI Warmline, which is very similar, but with a leather upper, these aren't quite as water resistant, but for snow and a little bit of slush and some medium puddles, it should be fine. It was about 50 degrees when I took them out, so it's probably up towards the higher range of where I'd wear these boots. I would say up to maybe 55 would be the highest. You could wear them above that, but when I started getting back on my walk, it was like 60 degrees, and that was like a little too much. They were starting to get kind of damp inside just because they're a winter boot, But you can get them down to 0 degrees, I imagine. It hasn't been that cold yet, but you can put Vivo's insole in there. They give you the thermal insole. This has space blanket material on the bottom, and it's a good option if it's really wet, because if moisture gets in under the boot, it creates kind of like a layer to keep your feet dry. I also use a wool felt insole. I really like this one because it doesn't mess with ground feel at all. It's very flexible, very thin, but wool is temperature regulating, it's moisture wicking, and it's antimicrobial, so it just helps your boots smell nicer. And then I also use some Injinji merino wool toe socks. These are the only things I've worn for 7 years because I like that they spread out your toes, and then like I said, for the insole, they have some really good breathability to them, which helps with especially if a synthetic boot like this that can trap moisture a little bit more, or really any kind of water resistant type boot or winter boot. Up front, they've got bungee laces, and I really like this because the boot already has a nice amount of volume if you have higher arches, but then you add in the bungee laces and there's just a ton of flex here, but then you can also just like slip your foot straight in without having to tie and untie them, which is an advantage over the GOBI Warmline, which has regular laces. They've added these little cute, they almost look like a little caterpillar up front. So what you can do with this is that instead of having to tie the boots, you can just take this, you can just tuck it right underneath the other bungee laces. And then I just kind of like left them loose, which is convenient because then it makes it easier to slip on and off. And because they are a higher cut boot, I find that they had some really nice wraparounds, especially because of the insulation too. And so I really didn't need to tie them that tightly, which is great because that also helps with airflow, just a little more room to move any kind of moisture or heat away from your body if necessary. But in terms of the insulation, it's this really nice puffy synthetic. Normally I don't like synthetic because it's not as breathable for insulation, but the puffiness helps move air around there. I found versus the GOBI Warmline, which is leather, they are a little bit less breathable. I think the synthetic doesn't let quite as much air out. But yeah, I would say if you like the style or if you're just looking for a vegan option, they work just fine. It's not a deal breaker or anything. Pull tab in the back here, don't really think it's necessary, but just a nice feature to have. A little bit of reinforcement on the back just to prevent the boot from tearing out. It is a stitched sole, which is great. I always love it when Vivo has stitched soles because I think they're a little more durable. And even though they could potentially let in just a little bit of water, it's not a waterproof boot anyways, so it usually doesn't make that much of a difference. But in terms of the sole, it's 3.7 millimeters, so super duper thin, a ton of really good flex. It feels almost like being completely barefoot, but there is, you can hear just, a little bit of density, a little bit of durability, which is why I like this Vivo sole. This is probably my favorite casual sole because it just perfectly balances like durability and then flexibility, So they've done a lot of things to this tread to make it feel more flexible, even though it's got some density to it. Like they have the hex pattern here, which gives you some grip in any direction. And then they've also cut the hex at various points, so that also adds a little bit more flexibility. But overall, this sole is just my favorite for cruising on urban terrain, and it can handle a little bit of gravel as well, just as long as that's not what you're doing all the time. But overall, it feels super comfy, just like the GOBI Warmlines, and I really like the sole for urban terrain. I can walk around all day on this, especially when you add like a soft insole on the bottom just for a little bit of padding. They just feel amazing. Like I mentioned, the GOBI Warmline is basically the same boot, just with a leather upper, and I really like that it has kind of a sheen to it because it just sheds water a little bit better. I think the breathability of leather is a little bit better than synthetic as well. So if performance is your top priority, then I would go with this one. Otherwise, I think the GOBI HIBER is also a really great option. But it's got the same insulation and 3.7 millimeter sole as well. For another good vegan option, this is the Ahinza Jaya, and they also have a version with a zip on the inside, which I really want to try at some point because it seems super convenient. The lace ones are just a little bit more annoying in terms of taking time to get on because the laces are so high, but overall they're super light. They're even lighter than the Vivos. They have a nice wide toe box. It's not extra wide, but definitely pretty similar to Vivo in terms of that squared off shape. And then I just like that it's higher cut, you know, because it feels more like a combat boot. I wish, honestly, Vivo would make a boot this height, or really other brands, because this is pretty much the only one I've found that's this tall. It feels really, really flexible, even more so than the Vivo Warmline and HIBER. And then on the inside, you've got some minimal insulation. So I would say the Vivo GOBI boots are a little bit warmer, but this one does have really good water resistance as well because it's sheen. It's a vegan synthetic CF Plus leather, and it looks quite convincing. You know, it's got a good color to it. It's got a little bit of sheen, but not too much. Then in terms of sole, it's 4 millimeters, but actually weirdly it feels lighter and has even better ground feel than the GOBI boots do. I like the tread pattern. When you bend it especially, it has some good grip for going on, you know, some light gravel and stuff like that. Mostly it's an urban boot, and I think you can hear it's just a little bit lighter than the Vivo GOBI sole. So you can get punctures through here slightly easier. I do have one in the middle of the boot. You can see it right there. But overall, I would say a good one for urban and a little bit of gravel too. If you want something super classy, this is the wildlynorthwolf. This is like my favorite, most unique barefoot boot design of all time because it looks like a herringbone suit for your foot. You know, it's something I could picture Don Draper wearing from Mad Men if he transitioned to barefoot shoes. But it has more of a medium wide toe box. There's a little less room than there is in the Ahinza and the Vivo GOBI boots. But it also does have a squared off shape, which is nice. And then it is a wool blend upper. They have a lining in there. You can't see it, but you can kind of hear it, that sort of swishiness. It's a polyester lining, and it helps with a little bit of water resistance. I mean, especially because of this upper, it's not a boot that you would really want to take into super wet conditions and, you know, muddy stuff. Because it's just going to get really disgusting. So I'd say mostly dry would be the ideal climate for this boot. It has your typical laces and then some quick laces at the top that make it easier to get the boot on and off. But honestly, my favorite thing about this is just like how light it is. It's pretty comparable to the Ahinza Jaya, and when you put them on, it's also so soft. Like one day I was driving and I got to the grocery store, and then I was like, am I even wearing shoes? And I looked down and it's like I couldn't tell, you know, because they're so light, which I love for a boot. A little bit of reinforcement in the back. And then in terms of the sole, it's 3.5 millimeters. So this is the thinnest out of the ones we've looked at. I like that they've split the sole down the middle. This kind of tabby style gives you just a ton of flexibility. Really, really good ground feel. Feels very comfortable for walking on urban terrain. But then also really warm, as long as it's not too wet. Finally, if you want something a little bit more rugged, this is the Blanco winter boot. And this has a extra wide toe box, although there is a ton of merino wool insulation in there. This is the thickest insulation. It's the warmest barefoot boot that I own, so it does take a little room in there, so maybe it ends up feeling kind of like the Vivo Barefoot GOBI boot. In the end, they give you a really thick stock insert in here with merino wool lying on it, and I took that out and I swapped it for a thinner one like this because I found that it just took up too much space in the boot. So that's my hot tip for these ones. But also kind of a sheen leather, and they are completely waterproof. The only thing with them is that like right here on the crease, I've just had a little tiny separation of the glued sole. It's not really enough to even glue it yet because the hole is not big enough, but that's just something to know about glued soles, is that if you do get any separation, then it's good to use something like shoe glue as soon as you can get some glue in there, because then you can clamp it and you can basically fix the problem. But yeah, that's the trade-off for glued soles. They are more waterproof than stitch, but they can come out. In terms of the laces, the one thing I don't like about this boot is just kind of like the laces are sort of dinky compared to how rugged the boot is. So you could swap them out if you want, but yeah, you've got quick laces up top like the other ones. And then in terms of the sole, it's 8mm, so it's getting a little bit thicker, but it's got a really good amount of flexibility, as you can see. And this is because you can see they've cut vertical lines into the boot, so it's got some really good horizontal flexibility. And then the lugs, I really like these because they're sort of claw-like, but they're kind of like bent in, you know, horizontally, so that they don't wear down. Like some lugs that are kind of like straight like this will grind down on urban terrain or rocks and stuff like that, and these don't. They feel really, really smooth walking on pavement or concrete, but you can also take them onto some more rugged trails, rocks, and they're really good on muddy stuff because the lugs are a bit deeper and they really hold well when you're going up a hill, and they're the opposite direction on the back going down the hill. But yeah, overall in terms of warmth, really good for slush, really good for super cold days. Like I've been down below 0 with these, just no problem whatsoever. All right, so that's my first impression of you, the Vivo Barefoot GOBI HIBER and friends. But if you'd like to support the channel, you can shop with the referral links down below. Browse and filter more products with the shoe finder tool at my website barefootwear.org, or watch my zero drop transition video to learn more about barefooting. Finally, if you have a question about the Vivo Barefoot GOBI HIBER or about barefoot shoes in general, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Peace.